So this is called Glen Providence Park. What's a glen?
It's a hill that runs down into a valley with a creek in it.
A steep valley, a narrow, steep valley. It's a good Scottish word, yes. And this is a typical glen. I mean, the elevation drop is significant, and there are very few trails that go up and straight up and down. They're switchbacks. So, why is this all flat out here? It was a lake, and what do lakes have?
Sediments.
Sediment, lake bottom mud. And we'll be talking about this just as soon as we get moving. But right now, we've got a creek running through it. Scroggy Run, or whatever you want to say. Welcome, welcome. It's about a 400-acre watershed. Unfortunately, in this area, of course, much of that area is impervious surface, which means it rains and it runs off. And when it runs off, it ends up in here. And when it ends up in here, it goes and with some interesting consequences we'll be seeing. How high, how much elevation from the little creek there to the little pond down here, how many feet that is, whatever. That's how much mud is on the other side of the road. Here. But if you look up to the top of the glen, beside the swimming pools, you're back into glen. So this is the amount of, you can almost figure the volume of mud. Fortunately, when DEP decided that it was necessary to breach the dam, I think that's moot myself, but it was their choice. They didn't go all the way down. They stopped it at the pond bottom level, which means we didn't get too much sediment deposited into the park. The pond, you can't really see that, but the pond is significantly more shallow than it was a couple of years ago. Anyway, the primary rock around here is a schist. And schist is an interesting German word. Be careful how you say it. It is finely layered, a lot of mica. Around here there is quite a bit of quartz is with it. Sometimes there are actually bands of quartz, or beds of quartz. And sometimes they are, the particular rock right there is really a tough rock with the intergrowing of the quartz and the mica. And if you have ever been on State Street, I've forgotten what the cross street is, and the big castle-looking bank there, that's all Wissahickon, PNC, that's all Wissahickon schist. And there's a lot of buildings made of that stuff around here. Not everywhere is the rock that good for building. Sometimes it crumbles over, sometimes it's mostly mica and just slides. So anyway. And you can see one little boulder there below the fallen tree that is this kind of schist. I spent probably close to an hour one day a couple of years ago trying to figure out how far that had moved. One of the interesting aspects of geology in this part of the world is that it is covered with so much damn biology. And that's just an artifact of our climate. It's warm-ish, but enough rain so that trees grow and leaves fall and make all kinds of compost and other things grow, and covers up all the rocks. So if you really want to study geology, you go out west or someplace where there's a lot less water and there's rock is showing. But one thing I did want to mention, behind that big tulip tree, for many of you, is a concrete structure. Now, that's not geologic. That was made a lot more recently than the rocks around here. But that's the foundation for the ice house. And this is the ice house trail. Now, and Stephanie just happens to have some photos of the ice house. the interesting thing about the ice house is the guy decided that this is a pretty constant stream, and he could make a dam here, and they could freeze over in the wintertime, and he could store it on the north-facing, of the side of the hill, inside of the hill, and keep that ice until August. And he did pretty well. But that dam was built in 1882, and Penn DEP said, too late, that dam was no longer safe. So I can't tell you how many weeks they took trying to get it apart piece by piece to get it down to here.
So this one, from a distance, the full picture, it's looking from up near like where the swimming pools are, it's looking downhill. So this, like we're looking on the opposite side, this is the dam that was removed a few years ago. And this is the ice house, and this is more zoomed in. So right where he's saying, you know, where the foundation is over there, like right underneath where that kiosk is, that's where this huge, I had no idea the ice house would have been this huge, but that's what the ice house was, which was used for, you know, 10 years or so for ice harvesting, and then, you know, refrigeration occurred and no more need.
When you get water coming through a rock, and there's no rock, there are very few rocks that are actually totally impervious. Shale is pretty good. Water tends to dissolve things. And if you have some minerals, hello.
Oh, you're fine.
If you have some minerals that can be dissolved, they end up in the water. One of the fascinating things about mapping geology is that there really is no such thing as well, that's not true. It's rare to have the same kind of rock absolutely uniform all the way across. And right here, you can see there is water, which actually you can watch it sprinkling down all the way down into the creek. And that water is groundwater. It's coming up from the rocks. Now this, because you can actually see it moving, might be considered a spring, or it may not be quite a spring, so it's a seep, but it doesn't matter, it's still water coming out. And depending on what the source is, how far away the source is and how long it's been underground, sometimes even in the middle of winter, that's 50, 52 degree Fahrenheit water. A little more about that later on.
What you're seeing actually is a whole entire filtration system happening. So we've got all these, the water comes down. You know, I live up at the top of 3rd Street. That water comes all the way down here. It's picking up road salt, if there's road salt, or you know, chemicals that are on the road from cars and whatever. And that water's coming through this ground, and it's filtering out a lot of those impurities. That's what's so important about keeping these trees and this type of environment, because it actually filters our water. So it's a very important part of our ecology and our green space here.
As I was saying about the impervious area, though, water coming off roofs, driveways, streets doesn't get into the ground. It comes zooming down into storm sewers, and it goes right into the pond, or the creek. Okay. Now, one of the interesting things about landforms and geology is that water flows downhill inexorably. Unless you dam it, and it still wants to go downhill. So we got a creek coming down here, and for some reason, it makes a big U and comes out down here. But that kind of meander is normal in streams that don't go down very fast. The faster they go, the straighter they go. The slower they go, the more the meander, whatever. Lower Mississippi is just all over the place. However, if you get a flood with enough water, the water's kind of lazy. It says, I don't want to go all around that big loop. I'm going straight across. Now this is a little hard to see specifically because you sort of got to get back in there and bushwhack. But you can notice right along here, it looks like there was been water running, and indeed it really has. There was quite a pothole on the other side where the bottom of this tree fell into. And every time we have water that gets that high, that little channel is going to be eroded a little more. And if we don't, it's possible that the channel could be the main stream of the main channel of the stream, and what's left over there is an oxbow lake, which means we don't have any intake for the pond. So I suspect that the Friends of the Park and the county aren't going to let that natural event happen. We can play with it and make levees and riprap and so on and keep the water going around. Great fun, great fun. Okay, have you noticed that in general, ignoring the small meanders, in general this creek is actually pretty straight. If you were to take a look at a topo map of the whole thing, it's actually a pretty straight line from the swim club all the way down to Ridley Creek. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a good map. I haven't found one yet that's the right scale and the right size. There are a lot of creeks that have this orientation in this area. One of the ones that's most obvious and most accessible is Dismal Run, which runs through Port of Tyler Arboretum and through Ridley Creek State Park into Ridley Creek. But a lot of the other ones are the same orientation. And again, that has to do with the regional geology and the kinds of fracturing that took place. So one of the ways you make mountains is the way the Andes were made and the way Himalayas were made, and that is you have one plate sliding under another plate and it kind of rumples up the top plate into a mountain range. The Appalachians, 230, 250 million years ago, were about the size the Himalayas are today. And where did all that erosion stuff go? Well, now we call it New Jersey. What's New Jersey made of? Sand and gravel. The whole state, almost. That's the erosion from the early Appalachians. So that was one of the things that happened to this area. Right here, we were underneath miles of rock. That's a lot of pressure. That far down, a lot of pressure, a lot of heat, makes metamorphic rocks, changes the shapes, metamorphic, recrystallizes minerals, makes mica into garnets and things, feldspars. What that does to the mineral structure in there is just fascinating. But anyway, that's beside the point. Not really, but. So right here we've had some pretty interesting and successively complex geologic history. The primary rock around here is called the Wissahickon schist, which was originally basically what New Jersey is now, except it got buried and scrunched and everything else. A number of years ago, quite a few decades ago, there was a reward offered for anybody who could find a fossil in the Wissahickon schist. It's been estimated since that if there were any fossils, which is not unlikely, back when it was placed as a bunch of mud and sand, the metamorphism happened since. Each little trilobite or something would now be, I don't know, maybe a mile long. That makes it a little hard to identify. So no fossils in the Wissahickon.
I have a question
Yeah.
on schist and what is that other like shale?
Okay.
We used to have a cabin up in the Allegheny Mountains, right?
Okay.
Up in that area,
Yeah.
and you would see that I don't know if it's bluestone or whatever, and it would flake in layers like that. You understand what I'm talking about? What causes that, and is that similar to the way schist is made?
Yeah. Sort of.
Uh-huh.
The primary source material for what you're talking about and for schist is clay. Any place you have quiet water, clay will deposit, will end up. Anytime the water is moving very well, the water tends to be muddy, and the clay is carried on farther down to where it is quiet. Clay minerals are sort of flat crystals. In the original shale, it tends to be sort of flat. But as soon as there's any pressure at all, as soon as there's any burial, things start to flatten out and get very, very parallel. Under the right circumstances, then you can have slippage along that parallel. These crystals are very small and very interlocking, and that's why they tend to be impervious for water. So if you have a shale layer, you can actually have a little spring or a seep right on the top of that, and below you don't get any water through that part of it. And you can see that in the Grand Canyon. You can be walking along and see in the middle of the cliff, there's this little waterfall coming out of the rock. Well, that's sitting on top of a shale layer. When you squeeze enough with enough pressure and heat, the clay minerals recrystallize into mica. A schist. And if you happen to have any sand with it, you get West Hagen schist. I mean, that's what happened here. That's the quick and dirty.
Good, thank you.
The reason why it's more or less, the glen is more or less straight, is tectonic. So there was some kind of zone of weakness, some kind of crack, some kind of buckle.
Okay.
And you notice that there's kind of an indent here, and just over there, there's another one of these little sort of indents. And on down a little farther, we'll see some bigger ones. I'm sure these are just local quarries, where the rock was close enough to the surface, they didn't have to find it, and they pull it out. Now this dark round one up here, and the one up by the end of the fence there, they don't look like schist. They're too solid. They're too massive. They're not flaky. They're not layered. One of the things that is associated with the kinds of plate tectonics we have had at least once around here is you get little chunks of sea bottom. The part of the tectonic plate that's below all the granitic continental stuff, and it's actually sea bottom. And these are fairly dark rocks, dark colored, a little more dense, more iron, more magnesium, less aluminum, less silica. And we have spots of that stuff all over southeastern PA. The hill that DCCC's on. There's a hill just off Route 3, Castle Rock, is that what it's called? These are all that kind of rock, and I haven't taken the liberty to take my geology hammer and break off a piece of that, because I'd probably get my wrist slapped if I did. But I suspect that these are pieces of that kind of dark rock. It's not uncommon. There are a couple of really big chunks of it. The whole northwest peninsula of Newfoundland is this stuff. And I think it's the western half of Crete is also this kind of stuff. Again, tectonically, I can show it. Other places in the world, those are major examples. But if you look at a geologic map of this area, you can see little pods of this stuff all around. Now you'll notice that right over here is kind of a little indentation in the hill and a little sort of ridge, and beyond that there's another one. And here's one too, it's a little flatter. These are not natural topographic features of the glen. I'll bet you dollars to donuts, which is kind of an even bet these days, though. It didn't used to be. These are quarries. They dug rock out to do something. Now this obviously, with the size of these trees, isn't recent. But this is called the Shingle Mill Trail, because someplace down there, and some people have a pretty good idea where it was an actual shingle mill
Yep.
here.
There
And
sure
my
was.
understanding is that they shaved the trees to make roofing shingles out of wood. Is that right?
Yeah, it was to make shingles, and it could be shingles for the sides of the house or the
Oh, right.
roof, you know, like
Okay.
back in the day. So yeah, but it was there's a mill race that went straight through the park, and then there's the natural stream, and there's actually I even have I have that in my bag if you're interested in seeing. But there's a map from 1855 that has both of those marked, and it was before
yeah.
the dam was put in.
Right.
So
And as I say, it's not easy to, not cheap to move rock very far, so you get them locally. So I'm guessing that these are part of the source of the shingle mill, if not the ice house.
Tony, can you tell us anything about the serpentine barrens and what is underneath of that? Because we do have
Yes,
a serpentine barren in this area,
yes,
right?
yes.
And that's very unusual. In the,
Well, this,
or no?
I alluded to those before, but I didn't mention that's what it was.
Okay.
Was that the
Uh,
sea bottom?
The sea bottom
That's right. That's
with the
what I
dark
thought,
rocks.
yes, right.
That's right. What do they call it? There's a name for that place in Tyler Arboretum with the serpentine
Pink Hill.
barrier.
Pink Hill.
Yes.
The Pink Hill, right?
That's serpentine is one of the minerals that's not at all uncommon in the sea bottom rock. Now, one of the things that I tend to do, and it isn't really illegal because I tend to get them back out, is to collect pieces of mica that are more than just little tiny ones. So if anybody wants a piece of mica, I was expecting maybe a few more children.
We're all children.
But if anybody would
Just
like
big kids.
some mica, I've got some pieces here.
And we
Most-
keep it?
Yeah,
I just want to get in close.
most of it
Yeah,
is
sorry.
very white or clear, and that's
wow.
muscovite. But some of it is quite dark, and that's called biotite.
I'll share it with my classroom.
Sure. This was a view of eastern North America 543 million years ago.
Oh, okay.
This was a view at 500 million years ago. So there's 43 million
43
years
million
right there. Yeah.
Give or take.
And this was at 440, which is another 60. Okay. So that's one of the things about astronomy and geology is that there's a sense of scale that the rest of us really don't have. So millions of years, yeah, whatever.